number 10 spot, we have the Vatican Library. The Vatican Library is a very secret library closed to the public. The only people that have access to it are popes and people that have gone through a lengthy screening process, and even then, they need to know exactly what they are wanting information on and will only be given info on what they ask for. This library is the top secret library with history and documentation since the beginning of time. The amount of dark gossip that is within those walls, I'm sure, is exponential. From the little that we know, the Vatican Library holds letters from world leaders throughout history detailing major events that us little guys will probably never be privy to. I'm sure they even have documentation on alien sightings. The church refuses to talk about what they have and know, and it's really just a shame. I'm a history lover myself, and truly that would be a magical experience to be able to explore this library. Ah well. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to be recommended more content like this. In our number 9 spot, we have Operation Snow White. On June 20th, 1977, Michael Meisner, a Scientologist, contacted the FBI after allegedly being held captive for months. He revealed that he was a part of the biggest infiltration of the US government in history, in something called Operation Snow White. On July 8th, 1977, 156 FBI agents entered a Scientology center in LA in the largest FBI raid in history. It was discovered that 5,000 Scientology agents infiltrated the IRS, the US Coast Guard Intelligence, DEA, etc. There were bugged offices, planted false information, stolen files, and so much more found. Apparently, the goal of this initiative was to remove any bad reports about Scientology. Some of the founders were sentenced to a few years in jail because of these crimes. They definitely want you to forget about this, but I'm sure they have done it again, and I'm sure other churches and organizations have done the same thing. We just haven't heard about it, and perhaps they haven't been caught. In our number 8 spot, we have exorcisms. This one shocked me. I knew that priests could do exorcisms, but I didn't realize that this is something that they do much. I truly thought that exorcisms were done more often in the movies to young girls doing the crab walk down the stairs. Yeesh, thinking of that scene gives me the shivers. Anyways, apparently the Vatican had a chief exorcist named Father Gabriel Amorth, who had served over 60 years to the church and had performed over 160,000 exorcisms. Excuse me? Wow. How have there been that many people infiltrated by demons and this info isn't more widely talked about? Also, that is just this guy's number. Apparently popes and priests around the world perform exorcisms all the time. I'm shooketh. I could understand that the church wouldn't want to talk about this because it is a private, very sad thing to happen to a person, but man, that's a lot of people walking around feeling like they have demons within them. Pretty scary. In our number 7 spot, we have His Holiness. His Holiness was a book that was released to the public in 2012, which is based on the secret leaked papers about Pope Benedict. Apparently the private documents were leaked by the Pope's butler. Yikes. Apparently after an investigation, it was discovered that the individuals who were not from the Vatican were blackmailing gay bishops because they had broken their celibacy vows. The Pope went on to resign after these documents became public. Well, this is definitely a scandal, that's for sure. I remember people talking about this when it was happening, but I don't remember hearing the church comment on it. But I guess they sort of did through their actions, and I'm sure Pope Benedict was encouraged to resign. In our number 6 spot, we have the dead man on trial. This is a little piece of history that truly terrifies me and is such a testament to those times. In 897 AD, a literal dead man was put on trial. The man had been dead for 7 months. He had been dressed for the occasion by someone whom I'm sure was traumatized afterward. His name was Pope Formosus. He was being put on trial for acts that he had committed in his life. He had a lawyer and everything. He was found guilty and stripped of his former title as Pope, and everything he formerly did was declared void. His body was stripped of his clothes and put into rags before he was thrown into a river, the Tiber River in Italy, specifically because this river was where a lot of criminals' bodies were disposed of. Pretty gross. I wonder if there are any ghost haunting stories from this river. I bet you there are. In our number 5 spot, we have the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank has had its fair share of scandals over the years, and you best believe that the church will not be bringing any attention to it by speaking about it in any way. Allegedly, to start off the scandals, it is said that the Vatican Bank received a church tax from Germany's leader during World War II, if you catch my drift. Also, allegedly, a large amount of money was paid to the IOR so that the Western banks couldn't track the Vatican's spending. The details have never been released to the public, so Lord knows where they put their money. But why would you want to hide your money in the first place? Perhaps so that no one would know what you're up to if you're up to no good, but also possibly because someone might be a threat and that might be a reason to shield what you're doing. Either way, the secrecy is questionable. In our number 4 spot, we have mental illness in the church. When researching for this video, one of the things that shocked me was the amount of people that spoke about how the churches do not handle mental illness very well. You would assume that it would be approached with love and compassion and guidance to get help. But the common theme is that people have been told to just pray and it will make the illness go away. Some believe that this thought process stems from the very old thinking that mental illness stems from demons being in one's body, and so people are being told to pray them away because that's what was always done if someone needed, an exorcism or to get rid of an attached spirit. The biggest problem is that issues go untalked about. The people bottle it up inside, and when prayer doesn't work, the person dealing with the mental illness feels like a failure or like they don't have enough faith. Hopefully this is something that churches of all religions work on improving, as this is just unacceptable at this point in time. In our number 3 spot, we have shame. Within many religions, there has been the problem of spiritual criticism, which has led to emotional harm within the church communities. I'm not talking about outsiders passing judgment, I'm talking about religious community members passing judgments on each other. This bad behavior is committed under the banner of spirituality. From practices of shaming members if they don't fulfill religious expectations, to bad-mouthing members who have left, making people want to stay out of fear. Scientologists have been accused of doing that to members that have tried to leave, but also other churches have been accused of this as well. It's super unfortunate to hear that in communities that have, the core purpose of being loving, they are people that are shaming each other. Talk about not practicing what you preach. In our number 2 spot, we have misusing their power. In recent years, it has become public knowledge that the French clergy took advantage of more than 200,000 individuals since the 1950s, mainly males. The Catholic Church has been accused of turning a blind eye to this happening, and many have been outraged that this went on for so long without someone stepping in. Allegedly, it wasn't until the 2000s that some progress was made. Before that, the church showed complete indifference to the victims. Through a series of investigations, 2,700 victims gave testimonies about what happened to them, and thousands were identified through archives. A wide-range study showed that there could be up to 330,000 victims. In recent years, about 2,900 to 3,200 priests have become suspects to these crimes. Wow. Truly despicable. I hope that there is some kind of justice for these victims. In our number 1 spot, we have the Salem witch trials. Most people believe that the witch trials were a result of many things: bad weather, a poor government, and paranoid leaders. But what a lot of people may not be aware of is the idea that the Catholic and Protestant churches possibly used the trials to compete with each other for followers. Pretty dark. History.com reported that economists Peter Leeson and Jacob Russ believe that, quote, the two churches advertised their finesse at persecuting witches as proof that they were the best church to join if you wanted protection from Satan. Witches, after all, were doing the bidding of Satan, so getting rid of them was a way to protect people from them. Wow. Well, that will definitely persuade 1 or 2 people, that's for sure. It has also been noted that the Catholic Church did not fear or acknowledge witches in history until the Protestant Church became a competitor threat.
Starting off this countdown, we have absolving sins with money. Basically, back in the day, the Catholic Church told people that they could absolve their sins and get a ticket to heaven if they just paid them. Like you were paying the church for forgiveness. Sorry, that's not how these things work. It also got to the point where people were paying for future sins. Not only that, they claimed that for a fee, relatives could get their deceased loved ones out of purgatory. And people fell for this all. Not only that, but poor people thought that they were screwed. They're like, if we sin, it's over. We can't afford to pay to get our sins forgiven. I wouldn't be surprised if the rich went around committing crimes and killing people, then being like, here's some cash, I'm all good now, thanks. In our 9th spot, we have imprisoning Galileo. In 1663, Galileo was like, science is greater than God. He also said that the sun was the center of the universe and claimed that the earth moved around it. I mean, he was on to something there, but just, he was slightly off. Anyways, the church didn't like these claims because it conflicted with the teachings of the church, so they imprisoned him. He was imprisoned in his home for years. I mean, they threatened him with torture, imprisonment, and even being burned at the stake, so let's just say he got off easy compared to those other punishments. It wasn't until 350 years later did the church be like, okay, yes, we agree, Galileo was on to something. Moving on to number 8, we have cutting funding. For years, the church gave thousands of dollars to a non-profit organization, Compañeros, that would help Hispanic immigrants get access to healthcare, among other things. That was until they found out that Compañeros supported a gay and lesbian rights group. So the church cut the funding to this company for their connection to the LGBTQ2S+ community. They're not the only group that the church has done this to though. No, apparently, and I quote, since 2010, 9 groups from across the country have lost financing from the campaign because of conflicts with Catholic principles. Moving on to number 7, we have the gay clergy member. In 2018, a secret Catholic group came forward claiming they had information all about their clergy member, Monsignor Jeffrey Burrell. They claimed that he was using the gay male dating app Grindr and would visit gay bars weekly. Now let me just say, there's nothing wrong with being gay. What's wrong is shaming this poor man and outing him, and the poor man had to resign. Obviously, this is something the Catholic Church doesn't want us to know. Why? Because they say homosexual acts is immoral and contrary to the natural law. They also say homosexual tendencies are objectively disordered. And they also preach celibacy. So having a clergy member that is gay is highly controversial for them, and they tried to hide it. A lot of Catholics were outraged when word got out. Scariest part is how they found out about Jeffrey in the first place. Apparently the group was tracking his movements based on the apps he was using. Pretty terrifying and also very, very wrong. Moving on to number 6, we have Joan of Arc. Turns out that the church wasn't the biggest fan of Joan of Arc. In fact, at one point she was pretty much the Catholic Church's #1 public enemy. Long story short, she believed that God was speaking to her and had told her to start an uprising to get the English out of France. By doing so, she pissed off some high-powered Catholics who wanted her gone. So they decided to put her up for trial. But legit, they had no evidence against her, but they were like, whatever, fake it till you make it, right? So they just accused her of heresy with no evidence cause it was a lie. And on top of that, they denied her counsel, which was against the church's rules. They just hated her and wanted to get rid of her. I think there were like 70+ charges brought up against her. One of them being for wearing men's clothing, in which she was burned at the stake for. In 1431, in front of a crowd of thousands of people, they lit her on fire for wearing male clothing. But it was discovered after her death that she never even did this. Literally, they killed an innocent woman. Why? Because they were probably intimidated by her. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the slaying of women. Pope Innocent VII wasn't innocent at all. In fact, he was terrified of witches. He said that they were real and a huge threat, so he created a huge witch hunt. He dispatched his men to Germany to try witches, and due to the pressure he put on them, countless innocent women were killed after being accused of being witches. All because Pope Innocent was paranoid as hell. Not only that, but in 1487 a book was written all about these witches. It said that this book promoted burning them at the stake sake, and that influenced a number of killings. Plus, the book was just filled with lies, like saying these women would stop cows from producing milk and would ride on broomsticks in the air. It's just truly messed up and spread misinformation and paranoia. In our fourth spot, we have the burning of the dead. Apparently, the church holds grudges because 43 years after John Wycliffe passed away, they had his body dug up and burned. Now, let me explain how it got to this point. So, John saw fault in the Roman Catholic Church and saw how it was corrupt. So he believed that people should worship God and Jesus according to the Bible, not according to the popes and their bishops and priests, because people are corrupt. But the Bible is not. He also believed that people should interpret the Bible for themselves and not how other people tell them to interpret it. Well, the church did not like this at all. So when he passed away, they ordered all his books to be burned. They also ordered for his body to be unburied. And for some reason, it took them years to get this all done. So 43 years later, his body was finally unburied and then torched, and then his ashes were just thrown into the river. In our third spot, we have the misuse of power. Just this year, it was discovered that the French clergy had taken advantage of over 200,000 young individuals since the 1950s. It is absolutely disgusting. The height of this happened between the 1950s to the 1970s. That's when most of the cases were discovered. Then there was a resurgence of cases in the early 1990s. And obviously the Catholic Church doesn't want anyone to know about this. In fact, it's obvious that the church was turning a blind eye to the perpetrators. They were more focused on protecting themselves and their reputation. They did not care for the victims at all. A report said, and I quote, "The Catholic Church's immediate reaction was to protect itself as an institution, and it has shown complete, even cruel indifference to those having suffered abuse." Like I said, it's absolutely disgusting. Moving on to number 2, we have the number of priests. In January of 2002, it was discovered that 234 priests have had allegations of sexual misconduct made against them in the last 50 years. You heard me, 234. That just makes me sick to my stomach. These individuals are using their title and control to take advantage of others. Some of the victims did file lawsuits against a number of dioceses and got multiple $1-million settlements in some cases. But that still does not take away their trauma and their PTSD. Even though the Catholic Church held a worldwide summit to talk about all this, it wasn't that effective, as priests were still caught taking advantage of individuals years later. Starting off this countdown, we have the nuns. In 2019, Pope Francis for the first time addressed the horrors that happened to nuns in the Catholic Church. Priests and bishops and other church officials have been taking advantage of nuns for ages. This was an ongoing problem for years, and the church wasn't doing anything about it. They were too busy focusing on covering up even bigger scandals and issues. Over the years, more and more nuns have come forward saying that they were victims. Some were afraid to speak up because they were dependent on the church and literally couldn't leave. Although Pope Francis acknowledged what happened, it's unclear the steps they are taking to prevent it in the future. In our 9th spot today, we have the Knights Templar. So Philip IV of France, as well as the Catholic Church, are directly responsible for torturing and executing innocent individuals back in the 14th century. Basically, Philip did not like the Templars in Spain and wanted to get rid of them. So he sent out his men to round them up, arrest them, and then imprison them. He then accused the innocent men of terrible crimes like sodomy, heresy, and renouncing Christ. Any of those crimes were punishable by the death penalty. Again, they were innocent, he just wanted to get rid of the Templar order. He then would torture the Templars so that they would confess. He would use a rack to stretch out their shoulders until they dislocated, or he would have their private parts smashed. This was all done while the church knew that the men were innocent. In our 8th spot, we have Pope Pius XII. In this case, it's what the church didn't do. According to a recent discovery of archives, Pope Pius XII was fully aware what the Nazis were doing during the Holocaust and chose to remain silent. He knew of the mass executions of the Jewish individuals and he dismissed this all. In fact, he said that they were unable to confirm the crimes, so that's why he didn't speak up against them. It says a lot when they refused to publicly condemn the Nazis. In fact, apparently his silence was so that the Germans didn't come for them, so that the church could would always be successful. They were just caring about themselves and not about the thousands of innocent individuals being killed. Moving on to number 7, we have the violent murders. Back in 1095, Pope Urban II gave rise to the Crusades during his reign as the head of the Catholic Church. He called all Christians in Europe to go to war against the Muslims. And it was not pretty. It literally said that they killed so many Muslims that the street ran with blood. And this was only the beginning. Waves of crusades continued until 1396, and although Catholics were not the only religion involved in mass violence, Pope Urban got it all started. And it was a violent time to say the least. Everyone was killed, no matter their age. Some people's heads were even put on sticks and then they would carry them around to scare others. Like, that is hella messed up. In our 6th spot today, we have William Tindale. During the 16th century, William took it upon himself to translate the Bible into vernacular English, so that more people were able to read it. But for some reason, the Catholic Church did not like him doing this, which is weird. Wouldn't they want the Bible translated so more people would become followers of it? Anyways, William actually had to go into hiding because the church was coming for him. They even burned copies of the Bible that were being smuggled around Europe. In the end, William was captured, tried for heresy, and then burned at the stake. He literally did nothing wrong. Want to know something even more messed up? Years later, the church was like, ah yes, let's translate the Bibles. They then turned to William's translations and used a whole lot of it, and then they never even apologized. Ridiculous. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Pope Alexander VI. So, Pope Alexander VI was said to be one of the worst popes in history. Why? Well, he is known for something known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. He basically invited 50 women over and told them to strip for him. Then he threw chestnuts on the floor and forced the women to get on their hands and knees and just surround their feet like animals. To make matters worse, he told the men that he invited that he would give the man who could get it on with the most women jewelry or fine clothes. So then they were all fighting over these women. This guy was hella corrupt and sick. Not only that, but he liked to watch horses get it on. That is disgusting. In our 4th spot today, we have the Coverups. So a lot of shady stuff has gone down with the Catholic Church. There's no denying that. For years, the church knew all about the scandals surrounding the leaders of the church and how they would take advantage of innocent individuals, but they kept brushing this issue under the rug. Then in 2001, the Vatican told them that any cases should be reported directly to the Vatican hierarchy. Years later, they still weren't dealing with any of these cases. In 2004, instead of getting rid of the priests in question, they just moved them to different churches or different countries. So that didn't really stop them. They just had a new set of people that they could take advantage of. They literally cared more about their priests than the victims. Moving on to number 3, we have the grooming. Over the years, people of power at the church have groomed a number of young individuals. Today, I'm sharing the story of Michael. When he was young, he was groomed and forced into doing things he didn't want to do. One of the brothers of the church would bring him to Broadway shows and movies. This was all part of the grooming process. Then when he entered the congregation of Christian brothers, that's when he was abused and groomed by 4 or 5 different men. This is absolutely disgusting, and of course the church would do any and everything to make sure Michael's story or others didn't get out. In our 2nd spot, we have the funding. CBC News and the Globe and Mail recently obtained files that expose the Catholic Church for spending some of the $79 million that it agreed to pay residential school survivors. That's right, they spent money that was meant to go to survivors of their residential schools. But instead, they took most of that money and put it into things like their Bible study group or for their personal lawyers and unapproved loans. Whereas other churches, including the Anglican, United, and Presbyterian Church, paid the full amount of compensation owed to the survivors without an issue. But the Catholic Church took the money and used it for themselves, which is disgusting since they played the biggest role in residential schools and the horrors that took place there. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Unmarked Graves. Earlier this year, thousands of unmarked graves have been found by residential schools across Canada. Residential schools were funded by the federal government and run by the churches. They would tear families apart, taking the children and forcing them into these schools in order to assimilate them, and they were stripped of their native language and culture and traditions. While in the schools, they were treated terribly. They were neglected, tortured, and even murdered. In these unmarked graves, thousands of innocent young individuals were found. This went on for 120 years. Tens of thousands of Indigenous children were sent to these schools. Thousands never returned home. Currently, the grounds are being searched for unmarked graves at the Mohawk Institute, and soon more and more residential school grounds will be explored. And sadly, we all know more bones are going to be unearthed. It's a very sad and tragic reality.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have St. Michan's Church in Dublin. This may be a church surrounded by the artsy urban setting of Dublin, but if you go deep inside the church, you will find mummies. Yep. Mummies. Its limestone vaults keep the air dry, which makes it the perfect holding area for preserving them. The church was built in 1095. Yep. Old. And it is said to have likely been a temple burial site before it became a church. To paint a picture of the crypts of the church, they of course have stone walls, are extremely dusty, and they're filled with coffins. And probably the devil is hiding behind them. Cute story time. When my brother was young, he saw a poster of The Mummy, the movie, and he said to my dad, "Dad, what about the daddies?" And that's what I think about every time someone brings up mummies. Ah, my brain. Coming up in our number 9th spot today, we have the Duomo of Kenza, Italy. We were bound to have one church from Italy in here, as, well, Italy is seemingly only churches. I did a bus tour throughout the country, so I would know. This is a church in an ancient part of Italy, and it is so old that nobody knows when it was built. You would think that archaeologists would be on that and figure it out by this point, but as such, they haven't figured it out quite yet. Probably because it is haunted. Dun dun dun, by Satan himself. The church became a cathedral around 1184, and its architecture is supposed to be a sight to see. The church also has many burials on site and is home to the bones of its first priest. Humans are fascinating. Do you ever think about why we keep the bones of something that once was in a box and then put under the earth so that we can visit the place where it was buried every year even though we can't see it? It's just a solution for our mind to be at peace with the concept of death. We're just fascinating. Okay, moving on to our next terrifying church. In the number 8th spot, we have the Church of the Assumption of Our Lady, Guadalajara, Mexico. But don't be fooled. It may look old and terrifying from the outside, but it is just as old and terrifying from the inside. However, it does have one really cool aesthetic that all the other churches are jealous of. On the perfect time of day, when the sun hits it on its right angle, the church's bricks seem to glow with a fiery orange, just representing the depths of hell itself. I'm just joking. Inside its walls, it has neo-Gothic vaults with impressive artwork from the modern and late medieval period. But it also has a beautiful collection of mummies on display. Among the bodies is a child who was killed for converting to Catholicism in the 1700s. There have been many people over the years that have claimed to see her eyes blink and her hair move. Not terrifying at all. Coming up in our 7th spot today, we have the St. Thomas Anglican Parish of Mulgwa, New South Wales, Australia. Yeah, this church reminds me of your classic horror movie church. Small, old, and just downright creepy. This church has a very dark history and continues to creep its locals and visitors alike. There is a legend that has 2 boys who died in a fire in the bell tower after a prank went horribly wrong. Since then, it is said that any kind of light angers the spirits of these boys. There have been many reports of lights going on and off, even including the lights of cars going on and off as drivers pass by the site. I wish I lived close to this place so I could try this out, because this sounds like a ghost hunter's gold mine. Coming up in our 6th spot today, we have St. Andrew's on the Red in Selkirk, Canada. This is the oldest church in Western Canada and was created in 1831, which compared to the St. Michan's Church created in 1095, it's not that old. But nevertheless, the devil may still house this creepy landmark. It is said that both the church and its graveyard are filled with restless restless spirits that had died from tuberculosis and many varieties of the influenza. It's also the resting place of a lot of the earlier settlers and HBC officers. Visit at your own risk. In our fifth spot today, we have St. Michael's Chapel in Hallstatt, Austria. A beautiful church surrounded by a truly spectacular view of the mountains and an alpine lake. But inside, you will find the largest collection of painted human skulls. I'm sorry, come again, Melissa? The largest collection, which means there are other collections out there. What on earth made someone look at a skull and think, yes, I think I should paint this? Just why? Someone out there is thinking, because art. This is also a chapel that was made during a time when Catholics believed that they had to be buried in a consecrated ground so that they could rise from their graves when the end of the earth came. Were they predicting a future apocalypse, aka Walking Dead style? Hopefully? Not hopefully. But since this was such a popular need, the graveyard actually became quite crowded. And so, as a result, naturally, they decided that the solution of storing bones for religious displays was a viable solution. As for the person who decided that painting those bones would be fun and aesthetically pleasing to see, we have no name. Satan sounds like a good name to me. In our fourth spot today, we have St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Key West, Florida. This beautiful white church may look sparkly and alluring from the outside, but you should know better by now. It's only so new because it's been rebuilt so many times, because it is cursed. The site was once a Seminole burial ground, and then the land was privately owned by the Fleming family before the church was built. It became a church as a result of the Fleming widow being assured that her husband's remains that were buried on the land would not be disturbed. But of course that promise was broken, and as a result the ghost of John Williams Charles Fleming still haunts the site. I would have thought that it would be her that would haunt the site since it was her promise that was broken, but maybe that's just me. Coming up in our third spot today, we have the Norwick Cathedral in England. Built in the year 1096, this church has a very Gothic but yet Romanesque look. The area around this church is almost 1,000 years old, and as you can imagine, there have probably been a lot of ups and downs within these years. As a result of such a turbulent history, it is believed that there are many spirits wandering the surroundings. Some believe it to be previous bishops and priests and possibly nuns, and some believe it to be people who were burned at the stake. Personally, I think it's the latter. If I were burned at the stake, you better believe I'm coming back to haunt you. Gosh, I'm so glad to be living in 2022. In our second spot today, we have the Rosin Chapel in Scotland. Known for having the finest architecture in Scotland, the church was founded in the 15th century. There are many ghostly legends surrounding this church, including the White Lady, who was believed to have been cursed by an evil spirit and is waiting for her knight to save her. People have said to have seen a barking dog spirit and the ghost of many monks walking around. People that have worked on the building, especially in the crypt, have vowed to never work there ever again. So that's saying a lot. I mean, if I were going to pick a place that I would think the devil would be wandering in, this would be it. Finally, in our first spot today, we have a personal favorite of mine, the Church of Our Lady Before Tin in Prague, Czech Republic, or more commonly known as the Devil's Church. Yep, if that doesn't tell you everything, then I'm not sure what to tell you. I have actually personally visited this church and the underground of this church, and I have to say, it is truly anxiety-provoking. This church is a beautiful landmark in the center of Old Town Prague. Created in the 14th century, its look is quite the reflection of the times. Intimidating. Inside its walls are altar paintings and old Baroque designs. But of course, it is also the home to many tombs and burials and dark secrets. Some say many brutal killings and hangings have happened in and around this church. Makes you ask the age-old question, what is the point of worshiping the Bible if you ain't gonna practice its teachings? Humans are a mystery to me.
And at number 10 is Scandals of the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank, also called the Institute for the Works of Religion, IOR, has been involved in numerous scandals. A substantial amount of money was paid to the IOR, so it cannot be tracked by Western banks, and it was used to store billions of dollars. It was created during World War II to avoid the restrictions placed on financial transactions by the Allies, and as a result, the Vatican Bank, being exempt from such restrictions, became the world's best
vast offshore bank. Since that time, the Vatican Bank has become pretty notorious for its connections to organized crime. In the 1970s, it's alleged the Vatican tried to purchase $900 million in counterfeit bonds and securities from a mafia-linked operation, and in 2013, a priest was arrested for trying to use the Vatican Bank to smuggle millions of euros for the mob. The most famous of the Vatican mafia scandals is the collapse of Banco Ambrosino, an Italian bank in which the Vatican was the main shareholder and which it used to launder money for the mafia. Now, after the bank's collapse, its chairman, who some believe ended the life of Pope John Paul I, was found hanged under a tree, which was concluded to be a mob homicide dressed up like he took his own life. Number 9. The case of Anna Luckland. Anna Luckland's demonic possession and exorcism occurred over several decades, culminating in an extensive exorcism that lasted from August 18th to December 23rd, 1928 in Erling, Iowa. Anna was said to have exhibited symptoms similar to possession beginning as a young girl and was 46 years old during her final exorcism by Father Theophilus Reisinger, a Roman Catholic priest. She would levitate, howl, and hang from the frame of a doorway. Now, the extensive exorcisms resulted in the deterioration of her body as she refused to consume food, also vomiting foul debris and what appeared to be tobacco leaves. Her head, lips, and face reportedly swelled, and she was also able to speak in multiple languages unknown to her. Anna was believed to be possessed by Judas Iscariot as well as Jacob, her own father, who had cursed her with the help of his lover and her aunt Mina. On December 23rd, the final day of the exorcism, Father Reisinger commanded the demons in the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary to depart to hell. Anna collapsed on her bed and began to shriek Beelzebub, Judas, Jacob, Mina, followed by hell, hell, hell. She opened her eyes and then spoke in her own voice, saying, "My Jesus, mercy, praised be Jesus Christ." The exorcism was successful, and Anna's case is considered by theology and paranormal scholars to be one of the most abundantly documented cases of possession in the 20th century, including a profile in a 1936 issue of Time magazine. Number 8. Damville Rectory. The Damville Rectory is a historic building that once served as home for the priest of Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church. Now, priests of questionable moral character were rumored to live here, if you know what I mean, including a man who was moved around a lot considerably before retiring from the priesthood, leaving some to believe the church was covering up his tendency of mistreating animals. Now, his fellow priests later confessed to hearing strange sounds coming from his bedroom and feeling uneasy in his presence. As the alleged site of the mistreatment, it's no shock that this place has some wicked demonic energy. Reports detail strange howling cries and deep scratches appearing in the flesh of workers. The current owner of the building, Terry Scott, even claimed that she was pushed by an invisible force. Now, the presence was so evil that a priest was called in to perform an exorcism, but his efforts did little to keep the demonic energy at bay, and whatever monster lurked there still remains, and I personally would not want to mess with it. Number 7. The Apostolic Penitentiary. The Apostolic Penitentiary is a secret tribunal that investigates so-called heinous crimes of individuals. It was supposedly found in 1179 and was kept secret until 2009. Only the Pope can grant absolution to people brought to this tribunal. Examples include attempting to assassinate the Pope, a priest breaking the seal of confessional by exposing the identity or the sin of someone confessing, a priest having sex with someone and then forgiving them for the sin of doing it with a priest, performing or paying for the termination of a pregnancy and then trying to become a priest, or spitting out a communion wafer. The Pope acts at the head of this tribunal and is called the Major Penitentiary and can either offer absolution or let the automatic excommunication stand. Now, such cases are held privately and anonymously as they are considered to be a serious matter. Number 6. Vatican Secret Archives. I mean, they're a secret for a reason, right? Well, many theories have naturally arisen about what might be held among the 53 miles of shelves and 12 centuries worth of documents only available to a select few. Now, it doesn't take a lot of effort to find people claiming the archives contain evidence of extraterrestrial life, proof Jesus never actually existed, or the true secret name of God, which has been handed down from pope to pope since 463 AD. The archives are not fully public, they're only open to scholars who have passed a rigorous vetting process, and journalists monks were not allowed to see the contents of the archives until 2010. Furthermore, documents within the archive only become available for viewing, even to this limited audience, after 75 years. While the Vatican claims the reason for this is how difficult it is to process the enormous bulk of documents within the archives, conveniently this means any documents relating to Pope Pius XII's actions during the Second World War and their other scandals are still restricted. Number 5. $5 million cover-up. A scandal and a subsequent cover-up regarding some spendtheft monks in the 1970s proved to be very costly for the Vatican in terms of both money and reputation. As reported by the New York Times, members of the monastic order in Philadelphia, known as the Paulines, raised money, in fact millions of dollars, for religious projects such as saying masses, building shrines, and renovating a cemetery, but they did not actually do any of those things. Instead, these monks used these funds to purchase cars, televisions, stereos, and other luxury items. Now, the Vicar General used misappropriated donations to keep a mistress, as well as stealing half the salaries of friends of whom he had appointed to the monastery jobs. Now, despite stealing over $20 million in donations, the Paulines still managed to default on over $4 million in church bonds. Now, the only way they were able to avoid lawsuits, bankruptcy, and criminal prosecution was through the intervention of the Pope and the Archbishop of Philadelphia, who dished over $5 million to quiet the Paulines' creditors and pay back their fraudulent loans. Number 4. Helping Germans. Following Allied victories in Germany at the end of World War II, German soldiers suddenly found Europe a pretty not great place to live. Thousands of high-ranking officials, many of whom were war criminals, managed to escape across the Atlantic to a number of South American countries, most notably Brazil, Chile, and Argentina. It's said that these soldiers were knowingly assisted by the Vatican. The Vatican chose to help them because they had hope for the revival of European Christianity and had a significant fear of the growing influence of the Soviet Union. Now, whatever the reason, the Vatican Refugee Commission unquestionably knowingly provided these fugitives with false identities. Now, the Vatican has consistently refused to comment on these events, and the majority of the relevant documents have still not been released from the secret archives. Number 3. The Dead Man's Trial. In the year 1897, Pope Stephen VI went through a lot of trouble to put a dead man on trial. It was one of the most bizarre things the Vatican ever did, well, at least as far as we know. The remains of the former pope were put on trial by one of his successors. Pope Formosus had already been dead for a few months and had no way of defending himself or his honor. Nonetheless, he was disinterred, put in robes, and stuck on the papal throne to be handed justice. A deacon was even appointed to speak on the behalf of the corpse. Now, Pope Stephen accused the former pope in front of an audience and acted like he was talking to a real person. The dead pope was, at the end of his trial, found guilty of stealing the throne from Pope Stephen, and Pope Stephen then had all of his acts while officially the pope labeled null and void, and everything Pope Formosus had done was undone. 3 of his fingers were cut off, and his body was cast into a river. Shortly after, though, Pope Stephen was thrown into prison and then strangled to death. Ties to the Mafia. On September 29, 1978, Pope John Paul I was sitting up in his bed, but he was a corpse. John Paul had been the Pope for only a bit more than a month, and Vatican officials say that John Paul died of a heart attack, but there was never an autopsy of his body to prove this, and when he died, the Vatican had indisputable ties to organized crime, including the American Mafia. As if to put emphasis on that, in 1982, the president of the Vatican Bank, Father Paul Marcus, resigned from his position after a trial of scams and scandals showed that the Vatican Bank had strong ties to the Mafia. Now, after some time, the Vatican Bank had to refund more than $200 million in American dollars to creditors. Father Paul Marcus was never charged for a crime, but he has been suspected in playing a hand in lots of sudden deaths, even Pope John Paul's. And coming in at number 1 is missing books of the Holy Bible. In the year 1684, the Vatican removed 14 books from the Holy Bible. Now, to this day, there's still no explanation as to why, and the Vatican doesn't want anyone to know. There were originally 80 books in the Holy Bible when it was translated from Latin to English back in 1611. These days, though, there are only 66. The missing books include Esdras, Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, the Songs of the Three Holy Children, Bel and the Dragon, Maccabees, and the Prayer of Manasses. What's even stranger is that Jesus' name was spelled Lizus before these 14 books were removed. The church changed the pronunciation and the spelling, and why were these mysterious books removed? There are many theories. Some say the content of these books didn't fit in with the Roman Catholic Church's narrative, so they were simply taken out. Some believe they made the Holy Bible too long and confusing, so they were removed, but there's no real answer. None of the books were particularly nefarious, and they don't seem to include any secrets, well, that we know of.
And we are starting off this list with the Ghost of Worstead Church. So back in August of 1975, there's this guy named Peter Bertholdt, just your average Joe, right? He's out with his family taking a stroll around the Church of St. Mary's in Norfolk. Nothing unusual, just a family day out. Peter's got his camera, it snaps a picture of his wife Diane sitting on a church bench, deep in prayer mode. Seems pretty ordinary. Peter, being the typical family man, claims there was absolutely nobody behind his wife when he took that picture. Fast forward a few months, they're hanging out with some friends, showing off their holiday slides, and boom, one of their friends points at a photo and asks, "Hey Diane, who's that sitting behind you?" Cue the collective confusion. Peter and Diane squint at the photo, and lo and behold, there's this white figure lurking behind Diane, almost like a woman in an old-fashioned bonnet. Now, they're not exactly the type to jump to ghostly conclusions, but when they saw that eerie figure on the projector screen, they were a little bit disturbed. They decide to investigate, take the photo back to the church. The local vicar, always up for a good ghost story, tells them about the legend of the White Lady. Apparently, she's this ghostly woman who pops up when people need healing. And at the time that photo was taken, Diane was dealing with some health problems and was on antibiotics. Coincidence? Maybe. Spooky? Definitely. At our number 9 spot, we have the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove. So it's 1991. Judy Fells, a former member of the Ghost Research Society, decided to check out the infamous Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in Illinois. Armed with a camera, she started snapping pictures, thinking she was alone in the graveyard. Little did she know, she wasn't. When the photos developed, Judy spotted something bizarre. There, on one of the gravestones, was a woman. Shown in this picture here. She appeared relaxed, slightly leaning forward as if gently rocking. Judy hadn't seen anyone while she was taking the pictures. Reports of this woman in white date back to the 70s. She's not your typical ghost either. Sometimes she's seen alone, just chilling on a tombstone. Other times she's holding something that many over the years have believed to be a baby. And it's not just in that one spot that her ghost is spotted. People claim to have seen her all around the graveyard. Next on the list is the photograph of the Wem ghost. So our story begins in the small town of Wem in England. In 1995, a terrible fire ravaged a building in town, destroying it completely. What caught everyone's attention, though, was a photo taken by local resident Tony O'Reilly during the fire. The picture captured a young girl standing amidst the flames, seemingly unharmed. The witnesses claimed there was no girl at the scene. No living girl, that is. Some said the ghostly figure looked a lot like a girl who died in a fire at the same spot in 1677. Her name was Jane Churn. According to legend, her ghost occasionally appeared in the town. Experts examined the photograph, attempting to debunk it, but there was no conclusive evidence. Tony O'Reilly, the man behind the lens, was said to be a straightforward and honest guy. He insisted that he hadn't noticed the ghostly figure when he took the photo and that he hadn't doctored it whatsoever. Number 7, the Brown Lady of Rynham Hall. Back in 1936, Captain Hubert C. Provand snapped a pic in Rynham Hall, Norfolk. It would go on to be one of the most well-known ghost photographs of all time. He happened to capture the ghostly figure of an entity known as the Brown Lady. According to the story, she's Lady Dorothy Walpole, a woman who got the short end of the stick back in the 18th century. She had an affair. Hubby found out, decided to lock her away in a dark corner of the mansion. She got hit with smallpox in 1726 and died a pretty miserable death. Visitors and staff at Rynham Hall have claimed to bump into this ghostly lady over the years. Some hear her footsteps like she's climbing the stairs. Others feel a sudden chill even when it's warm. And then there are those who swear they've seen her, the full-blown ghostly apparition, something like in this photograph here. Next, we have the famous Newby Church ghost photo. Back in 1963, a reverend named Kenneth F. Lord was snapping pictures inside the Church of Christ the Consoler, located at Newby Hall in North Yorkshire, UK. And as he snapped away, nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but fast forward to when he develops the film, and there's this bizarre photo showing up. In the picture, clear as day, there's this semi-translucent, almost monk-like figure just hanging out at the church altar. Again, Reverend Lord claimed he was all by himself in the church when he took the shot. No one else was around, so who the heck was this phantom monk? Totally baffled, Reverend Lord decided to get some experts involved. They checked out the photo and swore up and down that it hadn't been messed with. As to who these experts were, that info's not really known. There's a good chance these supposed experts were of the self-proclaimed variety, but creepy picture regardless. And at our number 5 spot, we have the Sefton Church ghost photograph. Alright, so in Merseyside, England sits Sefton Church, just a hop and skip north of Liverpool. Now, back in 1999, a photographer named Brad Steiger was out there, camera in hand. There was another photographer right next to him, both of them doing their thing. While they were clicking away, Steiger managed to capture something strange. In one of his shots, clear as day once again, there's a figure that looks like a priest. Not weird to see a priest in a church, but again, there were apparently only 2 people in the church at the time, neither of which were dressed as priests. No fancy setups, no eerie lighting here, just a random day, 2 guys with cameras, and a photo of a phantom priest. There's also a pub next door to the church called the Punch Bowl, which is supposedly haunted. Maybe the ghostly father in this picture heads next door to have a couple sneaky drinks now and again. Probably what I'd do if I were a ghost. I imagine it would get pretty boring after a while. In fact, I think that's what creeps me out the most about the idea of ghosts. Not seeing one, but actually becoming one, like trapped in this eternal monotonous prison, spending your days repeating the last moments of your death, and then occasionally appearing ominously in people's amateur photographs. Like, yeah, something to look forward to. Number 4, St. Botolph's Church Ghost. In 1982, a photographer, Chris Brackley, snapped a photo of St. Botolph's Church, not suspecting anything unusual, but when the film was developed, a mysterious figure appeared by the balcony. This one is a bit harder to spot, but just kind of take a close look in the top right-hand corner there. Brackley swore he hadn't seen anyone there when he took the shot. The photo underwent rigorous analysis, ruling out double exposure or equipment glitches. Brackley's gear was working fine, yet the unexplained figure was there. A few years passed and Brackley was then contacted by a builder who had worked on a crypt restoration at the same church. And during the restoration, a wall was knocked down, revealing a disturbed coffin, and inside was a woman whose face that the builder said eerily resembled the figure captured in Brackley's photo. Next up, we have the Coventry Spectre. In 1985, there was this prayer meeting at St. Mary's Guildhall in Coventry, England. Members of the Coventry Freeman organization gathered for a prayer meeting. They were your typical group, all suited up and bowing their heads in prayer. Now, the odd part happened later when the photos from the meeting were developed. Among the familiar faces was an unfamiliar one, a figure distinctively dressed in a long robe. This wasn't your average attendee attire, everyone else was in modern suits and ties, but there was this mysterious robed figure in the top left-hand corner. No one in the group remembered anyone dressing like that during the meeting, and what really struck people was the height of this figure. They were noticeably tall, not the kind of person you'd easily overlook in a room. Alright, in second place we have a demon in the hospital. The story goes that a nurse working her shift at some unnamed hospital snapped this pic. She'd taken a picture of the security camera, and in the shot you get this patient chilling in bed, and, well, not really chilling, I'll get to that part later, but anyway, he's in bed, and right on top of them, there's something straight out of your worst nightmares. A demon, at least that's what it looks like. It's your classic devil type of vibe, horns on its head, legs that resemble something almost goat-like. The entity apparently popped up briefly, and what's even creepier is that just a few hours after it appeared, the patient in the bed passed away. Is this a genuine demon caught on camera? A Grim Reaper's demonic cousin playing a visit, patiently awaiting to drag its next victim into the fiery depths? I don't know. Why don't you let us know in the comments. Finally, we have the Pine Hill Cemetery ghost. In Pine Hill Cemetery, a series of photographs captured by Tyler Karanasios brought attention to the possibility of paranormal activity in this quiet burial ground. What initially seemed like routine snapshots changed when he took a closer look at the pictures. As Karanasios enhanced the images, an eerie figure, almost like a woman wearing a veil, appeared in the background. He hadn't noticed anything when he was actually taking the pictures. It only showed up later. Pine Hill Cemetery in Hollis, New Hampshire has been rumored to be a hotspot for paranormal experiences. If you're thinking the figure is just a headstone, by the way, there was another photo taken during the day which shows that there is no headstone in that spot.
Number 10. Roland Doe. Starting off with what may be the most famous exorcism of all time, we have the case of Roland Doe, the inspiration for the 1973 film The Exorcist. In 1949, Roland, a young boy from Maryland, began experiencing disturbing phenomena in the form of strange noises, objects moving on their own, and inexplicable scratches appearing everywhere on his body. His family, fearing something supernatural was at play, sought help from medical professionals, but no relief was ever found. Eventually, the case caught the attention of priests, particularly Father William S. Bowdern, who was convinced that Roland was possessed by a malevolent spirit. A series of exorcism rituals were performed, during which Roland displayed extreme strength and aggressive outbursts. It was reported that during one exorcism, strange words and symbols even appeared on Roland's body. After numerous sessions, the exorcism was deemed successful and Roland's ordeal ended. He went on to lead a normal life. Some even went on to describe him as ordinary. Number 9. Michael Taylor. The exorcism of Michael Taylor is a very controversial case that unfolded in the UK in 1974. It centers around Michael Taylor, a middle-aged man living in the town of Ossett, West Yorkshire. It began when Taylor joined a local religious group led by Marie Robinson, which had been involved in charismatic and evangelical activities. Over time, Taylor's behavior became extremely erratic and aggressive, which was very out of character. He exhibited clear signs of possession, including speaking in strange languages, demonstrating superhuman strength, and showing a profound aversion to religious symbols. Honestly, that just sounds like me 5 minutes after I wake up. A local priest named Father Peter Vincent and a group of fellow Christians decided to perform an exorcism on Taylor. Exorcism took place over several days, during which Taylor displayed extreme violence and exhibited bizarre behavior. Tragically, at the end of the exorcism, Taylor was found in a courtyard standing over the lifeless body of his wife, Christine Taylor. He had savagely ended her life. Michael Taylor was subsequently arrested, tried, and found not guilty by reason of insanity. His case remains a chilling example of the potential consequences of exorcisms gone terribly wrong, raising questions about the intersections of mental illness, religious fervor, and the lack of action in the healthcare system. Yeah, I got political. It's my video. I can say passive-aggressive remarks about anything I want. Number 8. Clara Germana Selle. The exorcism of Clara Germana Selle is a case of demonic possession that took place in Natal, South Africa in 1906. Clara, a girl attending a Catholic mission school, suddenly began to exhibit bizarre and terrifying behavior. Clara started speaking in languages she had never learned, demonstrating an aversion to sacred objects and symbols, and levitating above her bed. Her fellow students and the nuns at the school were horrified by her sudden and uncontrollable actions, and they suspected her of being possessed by evil spirits. I don't know how they just suspected it. Like, if someone's floating, that right there is confirmation that they're possessed. Nothing to suspect. The local priest was called in to perform an exorcism on Clara. The exorcism lasted for 2 days, during which Clara exhibited aggressive reactions and disturbing paranormal phenomena. More witnesses claimed to have seen her levitating and heard her speaking in languages she did not know. After an intense and prolonged battle, the possession was believed to have been successfully expelled from Clara, and she returned to her normal self. Number 7. George Lukens. The exorcism of George Lukens occurred in 1778 in Yatton, England. George Lukens, a man in his early 20s, began to exhibit bizarre and disturbing behavior, completely out of the blue. Symptoms included uncontrollable fits, speaking in languages he had never learned, and demonstrating great physical strength, all which terrified his family and his community. Fearing that George was possessed by evil spirits, his family sought the help of a local Methodist minister. The minister believed that Lukens was indeed possessed and decided to perform an exorcism. During the exorcism, exorcism, Lukens displayed intense convulsions and uttered strange, incomprehensible phrases. The case of George Lukens gained significant attention and controversy. While some believed the exorcism was successful in casting out the spirits, others, including skeptics and medical professionals, argued that Lukens' behavior could be attributed to a mental or psychological condition. I mean, there was no levitation, so I'm split on this one. Number 6. Latoya Ammons. In late 2011, Latoya Ammons and her family moved into a rental house on Carolina Street in Gary, a seemingly peaceful neighborhood. However, in December, big black flies swarmed their screened-in porch, despite the winter chill. They couldn't get rid of them no matter how hard they tried. Strange occurrences continued. Late at night, they heard footsteps in the basement and doors creaking open. One night, Latoya's mother saw a shadowy figure pacing in the living room, leaving wet boot prints behind. But the strangest incident occurred in March 2012 when a girl seemingly levitated. Guys, levitation. It's clear to me that this is a legitimate exorcism case. The family's trouble led them to reach out to the local churches, but most refused to help. They even consulted clairvoyants who claimed their home was besieged by over 200 demons. Moving wasn't an option, so they tried a series of bizarre rituals. They cleaned the house with bleach and ammonia, made crosses with oil on every door and window, smeared olive oil and drew crosses on their dependents, and burned sage and sulfur throughout the house. Despite these efforts, their problems persisted, and the youngsters started acting possessed. They heard voices, saw shadows, and felt physical sensations of choking and being held down. Frustrated, they consulted their family physician, who documented delusions of ghosts and hallucinations in his notes, not believing anything supernatural was occurring in the home. One night, the family's behavior took a frightening turn when one of the youngsters was seemingly lifted and thrown into a wall, which led a call to the authorities. After months of torment from the spirits in the house, the Ammons moved to Indianapolis. The Carolina Street house, once an object of local fascination, continued to bewilder people with its strange occurrences, though the landlord remained skeptical. Number 5. The Loudun exorcisms. The Loudun exorcisms were the cause of a witchcraft trial that took place in 1634, Loudun, France. It all began when a convent of nuns collectively claimed that they had been visited and also possessed by demons. Several nuns claimed that they were having visions of their recently deceased confessor. When asked about who they thought was possessing them, their answers varied. Some said that it was a priest, others said Peter, and some said Zabulon. The nuns were acting erratically and deeply out of character for religious devotees. Physicians and apothecaries were contacted, and local magistrates were informed of the strange claims and behavior. Eventually, the Archbishop of Bordeaux was called. He ordered that the nuns be separated, thinking that they were all just experiencing a flight of mass hysteria. For a short while, it seemed that the sequestration of the possessed women worked to improve their symptoms, but the nuns' behavior began to worsen over time. They began shouting, screaming profanities, and barking, but no levitating. The convent chaplain decided that a series of exorcisms was to be conducted. The Catholic Church investigated the claims and ended up accusing a priest of summoning evil spirits. He was later convicted of sorcery, which was a crime punishable by execution, and guess what? He met a fiery end on a wooden stake. The nuns underwent exorcisms and everything did turn out okay, but it's definitely still a strange situation. Number 4. Gottliebin Dittus. The exorcism of Gottliebin Dittus is a supernatural case that occurred in the early 19th century. Gottliebin was a young woman from Germany who claimed to be possessed by demons and said she had experienced a series of bizarre and disturbing events. Gottliebin exhibited classic signs of possession, including speaking in strange languages, having aggressive outbursts, and displaying an aversion to sacred objects. No levitation though. Her exorcism took place in the small town of Mottlingen and involved numerous priests and religious figures. It attracted widespread attention, and many people flocked to the town just to witness the exorcism firsthand. The process was long and grueling, lasting several years. Gottliebin went through countless exorcisms, each aimed at expelling the evil spirits that tormented her. The events surrounding her exorcism were widely documented and scrutinized by many, who believed her to be insane rather than possessed. Society grappled with the concept of possession back then. The lengths to which people would go to free individuals from perceived demonic influence was definitely drastic. Number 3. Marchesa Irina Cornisi. The exorcism of Marchesa Irina Cornisi is a tragic event that unfolded in 2005 in Romania. She was was a young nun at the Tanakum Monastery, and she was subjected to a cruel and ultimately fatal exorcism ritual. She was believed to be possessed, so a group of nuns, priests, and a monk decided to band together to rid her of the unwanted spirit inside of her. And guys, I don't know how they came to this conclusion. I mean, she wasn't even levitating. So the acts that follow are just completely uncalled for and made even worse and more heartbreaking. They believed that by expelling the demons within her, they would be able to save her soul. The exorcism involved restraining her, depriving her of food and water, and subjecting her to physical and emotional torment over the course of several days. She was found lifeless shortly after, her hands and feet bound, her mouth gagged, and her body displayed signs of dehydration and malnourishment. The authorities were alerted, and an investigation resulted in the prosecution of those involved in the exorcism. They had no proof she was ever possessed. Her tragic death raised questions and large upset surrounding the world of exorcisms. The church hoped to cover this incident, but they had already created an enraged population who craved to see further punishment allotted to those involved. Number 2. Laura. In 2015, the exorcism of a woman only referred to as Laura was broadcasted throughout Argentina. Laura had been displaying signs of a possession for weeks prior, including the most important sign, levitation. After several meetings with her priest, they came to the conclusion that the only reasonable course of action was an exorcism. Throughout the video, you are able to witness every single detail and traumatic moment. Laura is bound and she begins to bang her head and scream profanities at the priest. The priest continued on with his work, and after a while, they were able to successfully remove the entity from Laura's body. She thanks them and has claimed to this day that she remains forever grateful. Number 1. Sachiko Ito. The chilling saga of Sachiko Ito, infamously known as the Drumstick Killer, commenced in 1990. Her journey into darkness began when her husband sustained a debilitating back injury, pushing him towards a life of alcohol and gambling. This led the couple into insurmountable debt, eventually forcing them to sell their home and relocate to a different town. They briefly engaged with a religious group that was centered around spiritual faith healing. However, they were expelled for using the organization's name without permission, causing Ito's husband to vanish in 1992. Sachiko Ito, now husbandless, moved north of Tokyo and began conducting spiritual healings, escalating her claims of being a healer and psychic. Her delusions reached new heights as she declared herself a deity capable of expelling demons from people. A growing following was drawn to her, resulting in a burgeoning cult. Ito's rituals involving cruel drumstick beatings, claiming to purify the soul, grew increasingly harmful. She accused followers of being possessed and had them mercilessly harmed. In 1995, one of her followers was hospitalized with severe injuries, sparking an investigation that unveiled a horrific scene at Ito's premises. 6 decomposing bodies were discovered, bearing the marks of ritualistic harm. Ito, her daughter, Yukata Nomoto, and another follower were arrested and charged with the deaths. Ito claimed the deaths were unintentional, caused by a religious exorcism, but the trial led to her receiving a life sentence, while accomplices were also sentenced to prison. In 2012, at the age of 65, Sachiko Ito was hanged, ending her reign of terror, though the impact of her belief system lingered ominously. This one is just dark and horrible. I couldn't even throw in a joke about levitation. It's just sad.
Number 10. Royal Air Force Squadron. This photo, taken in 1919, was first published in 1975 by Sir Victor Goddard, a retired RFA officer. The photo is a group portrait of Victor's squadron, which had served in World War I at the HMS Daedalus training facility. This isn't a normal photo though, as an extra ghostly face appears in the photo. In the back of the airman positioned on the top row, 4th from the left, you can clearly see the face of another man. It's said to be the face of Freddie Jackson, an air mechanic who had accidentally died from an airplane propeller 2 days earlier. And let me just mention, his funeral had taken place on the day this photograph was taken. Members of the squadron easily recognized the face as Freddie's. I mean, it was his funeral, he just wanted to be a part of the photo. It has also been suggested that Freddie, unaware of his death, decided to show up for the group photo, which is just sad. Number 9. Combremere Abbey Library. In 1891, Cybele Corbett took a photo of the Combremere Abbey Library in Cheshire, England. Cybele was an amateur photographer who allegedly set up her camera and took this hour-long exposure while at the funeral of her brother-in-law, Lord Combremere, was taking place 4 miles from the home. When the plate was developed, the transparent image of a man sitting in one of the library chairs was noticed. Many of the staff said the image looked like the late 2nd Viscount, and the apparition happened to be sitting in Lord Combremere's favorite chair. So, you know, it's
obviously him. It's thought by some that a servant might have come into the room and sat briefly in the chair, thus creating the image, but this idea was refuted by members of Lord Combriere's household. Lord Combriere's father, the first Viscount, had been involved in a mysterious incident himself years earlier while serving as governor of Barbados, when he had the Chase vault opened and carefully examined in search of an explanation for the moving coffins there. Seems like him and his father have both had some paranormal experiences, both in life and death. Number 8. The Watcher of Corroboree Rock. The rock formation near Alice Springs, Australia, known as Corroboree Rock, is made of dolomite that was formed more than 800 million years ago, and it's considered a sacred site by the Arrernte Aboriginal people. With that much history behind it and that much importance assigned to it, it makes sense that there's someone or something that looks over it. That's why the spirit is called the Watcher of Corroboree Rock. Now, no one really knows exactly who or what it is, but one photo of it dates back to the 1950s. In either 1956 or 1959, reports vary, a minister from Adelaide snapped the photo during a visit to the rock formation, and it's been puzzling people ever since. According to the minister, Reverend R.S. Lance, there was no one around when the photograph was taken, however, but when he developed it, the ghostly figure now seen in the image appeared. It's kinda nice to know that there's something taking care and watching over that area, no? Number 7. Leeds General Infirmary. Now, why wouldn't there be a creepy ghost photo taken in a hospital? With many patients' lives ending and beginning there, those places are full of spirits. Now, this photo isn't an extremely well-known ghost photo, but it's still creepy nonetheless. This photo was taken at Leeds General Infirmary by Andrew Milburn. The photo shows what appears to be a ghost nurse or patient fleeing into a room in a hospital corridor. Andrew took the photo to show his girlfriend where he was in the hospital and did not mean to capture a ghost. He didn't know this ghost was in the photo until he reviewed it more closely. Andrew had always been skeptical about ghosts, but seeing this figure changed his mind, and honestly, that would change my mind too. Number 6. Whaley House. Known worldwide as the most haunted house in America, the Whaley House is recognized for its historical significance in Old Town San Diego. They do haunted tours on the property, and this family went on a tour and got their photo taken. In the photo, you can see the brown outline of someone or something in between the two adults. Now, there are multiple people this could be. One of the most infamous ghosts in San Diego is the spirit of Yankee Jim Robinson. Yankee Jim was hanged in the house in 1852 after being convicted of stealing horses. Thomas Whaley himself, who owned and lived in the house with his family's years later, had said they could hear heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs. Visitors have reported cold spots and the feeling of their chest and throat tightening while in the home. Others claim to have seen Yankee Jim too, an apparition that appears and disappears when you get close. This ghost in the photo could also be Thomas Whaley himself. Today, and for many years, visitors of the house have reported seeing Thomas. One guest waved to a man she said she saw standing in the parlor. No one else could see the man, but when asked what he looked like, she described a man wearing period clothing that resembled Thomas. Adults too have seen him wearing a frock coat and pantaloons standing on the second-story landing, and others have seen his wife, Anna, usually floating about in the garden or in the downstairs room. Her ghost, which appears white and billowy, seems to just drift about and then disappears. So with so much ghost activity in that house, I am sure it's one of those spirits. Number 5. Tantallon Castle. Tantallon Castle dates back to the 14th century, stands on a remote headland near North Berwick, and was badly damaged in an attack by Oliver Cromwell's forces in 1651. A photo taken there shows a ghostly figure. The photo, taken by Christopher Anachin in 2009, still remains an unsolved mystery. It's a photo of a man in what appears to be 16th century clothes. It's known that no mannequins or cost guides are used within the castle, and experts have confirmed through analysis that there is no digital alterations at play. Even skeptics have been left baffled by the image after tests confirmed no technological trickery is at play. Psychologist Professor Richard Wiseman from the University of Hertfordshire, who studied the picture, said the figure appears to be in a period costume, but we know 100% that the Tantallon Castle is not the sort of place that has mannequins or costume guides. Seems like an old spirit just wanted to take a look outside. Number 4. Nottingham Galleries of Justice. One of the best ghostly sightings caught on film is this spooky black figure photographed by Simon Brown, who is a qualified parapsychologist. He was spending the day at the old Galleries of Justice with his brother and was simply taking photographs of the building. Although Simon says he didn't notice anything while taking the images, when he downloaded them onto his computer, he noticed what appeared to be a black figure shadow that seemed to have walked through a brick wall. Staff at the galleries have corroborated Simon's story, saying that they too have seen similar figures and have experienced similar paranormal encounters, but have not yet been able to capture anything on film. They've seen ghostly apparitions, dealt with poltergeist activity, and had doors slam on their own. Simon also mentioned when discussing the figure that it appeared to be in turn-of-the-century prisoner dress, dragging a leg behind him as though he was in chains. All I can say is creepy. Number 3. New home. Buying a new house is a fun and exciting time. But what if you bought a house that you didn't know was haunted? Seems like that's what happened to Michelle midwinter. Michelle had bought a new house in England and she took a photo of it to send to her friends and family. She'd gone outside, snapped a photo, and returned to the inside of the house when she noticed a face staring back at her in the bottom right window of the house. I'm sorry, when you zoom in, you can clearly see a nose, eyes, and shoulders, and the face of a man staring back at you. Now, Michelle didn't pack up her bags and leave right away, which I'll never understand. Instead, she posted the image online and was eventually contacted by a historian local in her area who believed that the apparition in the image could have been a man known as Old Man Kent, who was thought to be a suspect in a death back in 1860. Initially, Michelle dismissed the image as nothing more than reflections and refractions of light from the flowers outside her window, but following further paranormal sightings and activity within the house, such as cold spots and lights flickering, it seems like Michelle is now a believer. I can't believe having to live in a house like that. Number 2. Bedroom ghost. In 2005, a teenage girl had just gotten her first digital camera. She was messing around, experimenting with the features, and taking photos of her friend Tommy. The two photos were taken seconds apart. The first was taken with flash and the second was taken without. When taking the photo, the photographer and her friend were the only people in the room at the time, but there's clearly another person in the photo on the right. It looks like an older person wearing glasses, and I mean there's clearly someone there. The girl said that unusual things were always happening in her family's house as there were noises and things moved. Maybe it was the spirit who was doing all this and decided to reveal themselves. If I took a photo of a ghost in my bedroom though, I would never sleep there again. And coming in at number 1 is the ghost in the water. In 2014, Kim Davidson was swimming in a lake with a friend and their combined 3 children. They went to Murphy's Hole in Lochar River in Queensland, Australia. While there, they took a photograph. Normal, right? But when the photograph came out, there was a ghostly figure of a girl behind the group who looked like she'd been leering behind the family. They said that there was nothing in between them when the photo was taken, and on close examining the image, they realized it was a white face with dark eyes and 2 horns on either side of the head. Its fingers are on Kim's shoulder and on the small girl's right arm. Kim posted it on Facebook, and upon seeing the image, many comments were made, some saying that the 2 horns looked like 2 ponytails or buns. A fellow user shared the story of Doreen O'Sullivan, a girl who accidentally drowned in the same creek in the same spot in 1913. Her obituary was found in the Brisbane Courier, dated the 22nd of November 1913. The notice reads that Doreen O'Sullivan, aged 13 years, the oldest daughter of Mr. James O'Sullivan, was accidentally drowned whilst bathing in the Lockyer Creek on Friday afternoon. Nearly an hour elapsed before the body was recovered. Now, the spot, which has always been considered dangerous, is known as Murphy's Hole and is over 20 feet deep. Upon reading this, Kim recollected that they had experienced strange things that day while they were swimming in water. She felt someone's presence behind her, but she ignored it. Twice, someone in the water even grabbed her elder daughter's leg. This made Kim believe in the presence of a spirit in the water. By looking at the picture, she was convinced that the unknown face was that of Doreen. Kim got 2 paranormal experts to check out the photo, and after investigating the photograph carefully, they concluded that the shape of the image was that of a child. Number 10. SS Watertown. In December 1924, James Courtney and Michael Meehan were crew members on the SS Watertown. They were cleaning a cargo tank of the oil tanker, and they were overcome by gas fumes, which resulted in both of their deaths. Due to this, the crew buried them at sea, but to their astonishment, the ghostly faces of the soldiers appeared in the water the next day. Yeah, like in the waves. Later on, many other crew members reported seeing the faces as well. The faces were so visible that the captain of the ship ordered them to take a picture of them to have for proof, you know, so people didn't think that they were crazy. And this was smart, because if someone told me they saw faces of 2 dead men in the water, I would probably never talk to them again and think that they were cuckoo. Although, in the picture, you can clearly see 2 faces, which is just plain creepy. When the SS Watertown returned to land, the negative was even checked for fakery and proclaimed genuine. So yeah, just 2 faces chilling in the waves. no big deal. Number 9. The nurse. This photo was taken in an abandoned tuberculosis hospital in Louisville, Kentucky called Waverly Hills Sanatorium in 2006. As you can imagine, many people passed away here, and it's rumored to be filled with paranormal activity. In recent years, it has become one of America's most popular destinations for ghost hunters. This image depicts a woman just standing to the right side, but when the photo was taken, no one was there. It was a ghost. It has been agreed among the paranormal community that the photo depicts Mary Lee, a nurse who took her own life in the hospital. The story goes this poor woman was impregnated by a doctor who worked in the hospital, but later wanted nothing to do with her. Nowadays, she wanders the halls of the hospital and interacts with ghost hunters. Number 8. Tulip Staircase. Reverend Ralph Hardy, a retired clergyman from White Rock, British Columbia, took this famous photograph in 1966. Originally, he only wanted to take a picture of the elegant tulip staircase in the Queen's House section of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. And I mean, I don't blame him. They're pretty. But upon development, the photo revealed a shrouded figure climbing the stairs. It's strange and unsettling, and Ralph said there was no one else in the frame when he took it. Experts who examined the original negative concluded that it had not been tampered with. The vicinity of the staircase is rumored to be haunted, and unexplained footsteps have often been heard there, so it's most likely something supernatural who just wanted their photo taken. Number 7. The Brown Lady. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall is a ghost that reportedly haunts Raynham Hall in Norfolk, England. It became one of the most famous hauntings in the United Kingdom when photographers from Country Life magazine claimed to have captured its image. According to the legend, the Brown Lady is the ghost of Dorothy Walpole, the sister of Robert Walpole, generally regarded as the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. She was the second wife of Charles Townshend, 2nd Viscount Townshend, who was notorious for his violent temper. The story goes that when Charles discovered that his wife had committed adultery with Lord Wharton, he punished her by locking her in her rooms in the family home, Raynham Hall. According to Mary Wortley Montagu, Dorothy was in fact entrapped by the Countess of Wharton. She invited Dorothy over to stay for a few days, knowing that her husband would never allow her to leave, not even to see her children. She remained at the Raynham Hall until her death in 1726 from smallpox. This is just an extremely sad story, and I can't imagine her pain. The first sighting of the Brown Lady was in 1835, and the photograph was taken in 1936. Number 6. Falling through the ceiling. Back in the 1950s, the Cooper family from Texas moved into their new house. Once there, they took a family photo, which seems normal, right? Well, not for them. When the picture was developed, the image of a body falling from the ceiling was clearly visible. To be clear, no one fell from the ceiling when they took the photo, so what happened? As further investigation on the story has brought no plausible explanation, there exist many speculations, including one that argues that the shadow is the ghost of the previous owner of the house. But my question is, why is he falling from the ceiling, and why did he have to ruin that beautiful family photo? I remember seeing this photo on the internet when I was probably too young to see it, and after all these years, this image still gives me chills. Ugh. Number 5. Backseat Ghost. On March 22nd, 1959, Mabel Chinnery and her husband drove to the graveyard in which her mother had been buried. Her mother had died a week previously, and they were going to take photos of her grave, and they did. As Mabel returned to the car, she decided to use her last remaining shot to take a candid picture of her husband waiting in the vehicle on the passenger side. Nothing was out of the ordinary, it was just a random photo, but when the pictures were developed, one of Mabel's friends pointed out that someone, believed to be her mother, appeared to be behind her husband in the back seat of the car. Now, was the figure her mother or some other spirit? Who knows? I mean, they were in a graveyard, it could have been anyone or anything. The photograph itself wasn't seen in the United States until the story got a whole page in the Sunday newspaper. Mabel stated that the spot where the unexpected figure appeared in the back of the car is where her mother always sat when they went for drives, so it makes sense that it could be her. An unnamed photo expert is quoted as saying, "The lady in the back can't be the result of a double exposure. If it were, the door's upright wouldn't block off part of her face, and she can't be a reflection in the window either." So maybe it really is Mabel's mother. Number 4. Wem Ghost. On November 19, 1995, Wem Town Hall burned to the ground in Wem, Shropshire, located in England. During the fire, Tony O'Rahilly, a sewage farm worker who was also an amateur photographer, was originally stopped by police from approaching the burning building. He took a picture of the blaze from across the street with a 200mm lens. It appeared to depict the image of a young girl in the doorway of the burning building. Now, to be clear, there were no injuries or fatalities from the fire. This was not a human. Locals who saw the photo believed it was the ghost of Jane Churm, a young girl who was accused in 1677 of starting a fire in the same town. The image of the girl in the doorway of the burning building was not noticed by Tony, the photographer, or the onlookers. It only appeared after the photo had been developed. I mean, if she was accused of starting a fire and then she popped back up in an area where another fire started, it seems like it really could be Jane. Number 3. The Spectre of Newby Church. The Spectre of Newby Church is the name given to a figure in the photograph taken in the Church of Christ the Consoler on the grounds of Newby Hall in North Yorkshire, United Kingdom. The image was taken in 1963 by the Reverend Kenneth F. Lord. As the figure appears to resemble a human, much speculation has been had regarding what type of person might be in the image. Most speculation by believers has concluded that it resembles a 16th century monk with a white shroud over his face, possibly to mask leprosy or another disfigurement. Others believe it looks like a plague doctor from the 16th and 17th centuries. Initial claims suggest that the figure would measure at 9 feet tall, but its feet are not visible, so it could easily be standing on a box, giving the impression of height. Some people thought the photo was due to double exposure, but photographic experts have concluded that the image is not the result of double exposure. So what was it, and why was it in a church? No one truly knows, but it's extremely frightening. What does it look like to you? Let me know in the comments. Number 2. Mystery Guest. On January 22nd, 1985, the Coventry Freemen organization and their guests stood in prayer during a dinner event. All the guests are still, and as it was a dark room, the photographer probably thought it would be the perfect time to allow for a longer than usual exposure to get enough light into the picture. Makes sense. Now, nothing was out of the ordinary at the time, but as people started to see the print of the picture, a mystery surfaced. Who was the robed figure standing near the end of one of the tables? No one had dressed up for the event, and no one remembers anyone standing there as they stood for prayer. The figure also seems to be taking part in the prayer, head slightly bowed, hands clasped in front. St. Mary's, Coventry, Warwickshire is where the event was hosted. It has many legends of ghosts and paranormal activity, but I wonder why this being decided to join in prayer. It just gives me bad vibes, like evil lurks within it. And coming in at number 1 is the Young Boy. One of the most famous haunted houses in the United States is the Dutch Colonial House at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The haunting stems from the night of November 13th, 1974, when 23-year-old Ronald Defoe ended the lives of all 6 members of his family. He was then arrested, convicted, and given 6 concurrent life sentences. In December of 1975, George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, moved into the house and claimed that spooky things were happening. For example, George would wake up at 3:15 every morning, which was the approximate time that Ronald committed his crimes. Kathy said she would feel a ghostly presence and be embraced by it. All of this and more caused the family to flee in fear after only staying in the house for 28 days, and honestly, I don't blame them. Due to this, demonologist Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the house and set up time-lapse infrared cameras and caught this photo. The picture wasn't made public until 3 years later when George Lutz appeared on the Merv Griffith Show in 1979. Believers of the haunting think that the picture is the ghost of the youngest Defoe son, John Matthew, who was 9 at the time. Others believed it's a staged photo, but despite its controversy, this picture is one of the most frightening images from the Amityville horror.